The neon lights of the Riverside Casino painted Sarah Martinez's face in alternating shades of red and gold as she clutched her purse tighter against her chest. The October wind whipped through downtown Reno, Nevada, carrying the scent of desperation and false hope that seemed to emanate from every gambling establishment on Virginia Street. Just this once, she whispered to herself, the same lie she'd been telling for 3 months now. Her daughter Emma's school tuition bill crumpled in her free hand, $2,147 due in 2 weeks, money she didn't have after the divorce settlement, left her with barely enough to cover rent. Inside, the casino's artificial atmosphere wrapped around her like a warm blanket. No clocks, no windows, just the hypnotic symphony of slot machines and the soft shuffle of cards. Sarah had always been good with numbers. She'd been an accountant before Emma was born, and the mathematics of poker seemed so simple, so logical. At the 5 minimum table, she pulled out her emergency credit card. Just enough to win back. What I need, she told herself, sliding into the worn velvet chair. The dealer, a middle-aged man named Pete with kind eyes, welcomed her with practiced professionalism. First time? Pete asked, noticing her nervous energy. Yes. No, I mean, I've played before, just not here. Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she placed her first bet, $20. That was all she could afford to lose. 4 hours later, she walked out $340 ahead, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and something else. Something that felt dangerously close to euphoria. Emma's tuition was still a problem, but this felt like a solution, a way to take control when everything else in her life seemed to be spiraling. She didn't notice the way her hands shook as she started her Honda Civic, or how she kept glancing back at the casino's entrance in her rearview mirror. She was too focused on the possibility that had just opened up in her mind. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could solve all their problems with one more trip. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's first visit to Riverside Casino, and what started as a desperate one-time solution had morphed into something she couldn't quite name or control. She'd returned 6 times, telling herself each visit would be the last, the one that would set everything right. Emma sat at their small kitchen table, her algebra homework spread out before her, stealing worried glances at her mother. At 14, Emma had inherited her father's intuition and her mother's analytical mind. She could see the patterns even when Sarah couldn't. "Mom, you missed parent-teacher conferences again," Emma said softly, not looking up from her textbook. Mrs. Rodriguez called twice. Sarah stood at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her banking app for the 3rd time that hour. The $340 she'd won initially had grown to nearly $800 2 weeks ago, but yesterday's sure thing poker game had wiped out almost everything. Her checking account showed $127.43. Not enough for groceries, let alone Emma's school expenses. "I'll call her back tomorrow, sweetheart. Work's just been really demanding lately." The lie came easier now, though it still made her stomach twist. Sarah hadn't been to her part-time bookkeeping job in 4 days, claiming illness each time she called in. Emma's pencil stopped moving. "Mom, are we okay? I mean financially?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah wanted to reassure her daughter to be the stable, responsible parent Emma deserved. Instead, she found herself calculating odds in her head. If she could just get back to that poker table tonight, if she could win back what she'd lost, plus enough extra to catch up on everything. "We're fine, baby. Don't worry about adult. Und things okay?" Sarah forced a smile, but her fingers were already reaching for her car keys. "I have to run out for a few hours. There's leftover pasta in the fridge for dinner." "Where are you going?" Emma's voice was smaller now, younger. "Just errands. I'll be back before bedtime." As Sarah drove toward downtown Reno, she didn't see Emma watching from their apartment window, or notice how her daughter's shoulders sagged as the Honda disappeared around the corner. She was too focused on the growing conviction that tonight would be different, that tonight she would win back everything they'd lost and more. The casino's lights seemed brighter somehow, more welcoming, as if they were calling specifically to her. The notification sound from Sarah's phone pierced through the casino's ambient noise at 2:47 a.m. She'd been at the poker table for 7 straight hours, and what had started as a $200 attempt to get even had become a $200 disaster. Her credit cards were maxed out, her checking account overdrawn, and the text message glowing on her screen made her blood run cold. "Mom, where are you? I'm scared. The lights went out and I can't get them back on. Please come home." Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at Emma's message. The electricity had been shut off. She'd ignored the final notice for 3 weeks, convincing herself she'd win enough to pay it before it became a problem. Now her 14-year-old daughter was sitting alone in their dark apartment at nearly 3 a.m., while Sarah sat in a brightly lit casino, surrounded by strangers and empty promises. "I fold," she whispered, pushing her cards away from what would have been another losing hand. The drive home felt endless. Every red light was an accusation. Every mile a reminder of how far she'd fallen from the mother she used to be. When she finally climbed the stairs to their second-floor apartment, she found Emma curled up on the couch under every blanket they owned, her phone's flashlight creating a small circle of safety in the darkness. "Mom." Emma's voice was hoarse, as if she'd been crying. "I'm here, baby. I'm so sorry." Sarah gathered her daughter into her arms, feeling the girl's body shake with relief and exhaustion. "I'll fix this. I'll call the electric company first thing in the morning." "With what money?" The question was barely a whisper, but it cut through Sarah like a blade. Emma knew. Maybe she'd known for weeks, maybe longer. Children weren't stupid, especially not Emma, who had always been observant and smart and far too mature for her age. They sat together in the darkness, Sarah stroking Emma's hair while her mind raced through options that didn't exist. Her credit was destroyed, her savings were gone, and her paycheck from the bookkeeping job, if she still even had a job, wouldn't cover even half of what they owed. "Mom," Emma said after a long silence, "my friend Jessica's parents are getting divorced, and her mom moved in with her sister for a while. Maybe I could stay with Aunt Linda until things get better." The suggestion hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her daughter was offering to leave, to remove herself from the chaos that Sarah's choices had created. At 14, Emma was trying to solve the problems that her mother couldn't or wouldn't face. "No," Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "No, we're not separating. We're family, and families stick together. I'm going to fix this." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah could feel the familiar pull, the whisper in the back of her mind suggesting that maybe, if she could just get back to that table one more time, she could win enough to turn everything around. The casino was only 20 minutes away, and she knew exactly which games gave the best odds. The knock on the door came at 8:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, sharp and official. Sarah knew immediately what it meant. She'd been expecting it for days, dreading it with every fiber of her being. Through the peephole, she could see 2 uniformed officers and a woman in a business suit carrying a clipboard. Emma was at school, thank God. At least she wouldn't have to witness this. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Officer Jenkins, and this is Child Protective Services caseworker Lisa Chen. We need to speak with you about Emma's welfare." The words Sarah had been dreading for weeks were finally spoken aloud. Someone, probably Emma's school counselor or maybe a concerned neighbor, had made the call. The missed parent-teacher conferences, the electricity being shut off, Emma coming to school sometimes without lunch money or proper winter clothes as Sarah's gambling losses mounted. "Emma's at school," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, as she let them into the apartment. The morning light streaming through their windows illuminated the chaos. Unpaid bills scattered across the coffee table, Empty takeout containers, the lingering smell of candles they'd been using since the power was restored just 2 days ago. "We're aware," Miss Chen said gently but firmly. "We'll need to speak with her after school. Right now, we want to talk to you about the concerns that have been raised." The next hour passed in a blur of questions and forms and barely contained panic. Sarah found herself explaining things she'd never said out loud. How she'd started gambling to try to solve their financial problems. How it had spiraled beyond her control. How she'd been lying to Emma and to herself about the severity of their situation. "Ms. Martinez," Ms. Chen said as they prepared to leave, "I'm going to be direct with you. Emma is a bright, resilient young woman, but she's been taking on responsibilities that no child should have to bear. She's been trying to protect you while essentially parenting herself." The words hit harder than any losing hand at the poker table ever had. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "That depends largely on you," Officer Jenkins replied. "We'll be conducting a full investigation, which includes interviewing Emma and assessing your living situation. If you're serious about getting help, there are resources available: gambling addiction support groups, financial counseling, assistance programs." After they left, Sarah sat alone in her quiet apartment, staring at the business cards they'd left behind. Gamblers Anonymous, Nevada Council on Problem Gambling, Clark County Social Services. Each card represented an admission of failure, a public acknowledgement of what she'd become. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Everything okay at home? Jenny's mum saw police cars in our parking lot this morning. Even now, her daughter was worried about her, checking in during school hours to make sure her mother was safe." The role reversal was complete. The child caring for the parent, the 14-year-old being more responsible than the adult. Sarah looked at the business cards again, then at her car keys sitting on the counter. The casino was 20 minutes away. She had about $40 in cash, enough for a few hands, maybe enough to start clawing her way back. But Emma's text message glowed on her phone screen, a reminder of everything that truly mattered and everything she stood to lose forever. Emma's foster care placement hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, just 5 days away. The reality of potentially losing her daughter had shattered whatever delusions Sarah had been clinging to about her gambling being under control or temporary. She held the Gamblers Anonymous meeting schedule in her trembling hands, reading the same information over and over. Meetings daily, 7 p.m., St. Mark's Community Center. It was Thursday evening, and Emma was doing homework at their kitchen table with a forced normalcy that broke Sarah's heart. They'd talked about the CPS visit in careful, measured sentences, both of them dancing around the enormity of what was at stake. "Mom," Emma said without looking up from her biology textbook, "I want you to know that whatever happens on Monday, I don't blame you." The words were meant to be comforting, but they cut deeper than any accusation could have. Her 14-year-old daughter was already preparing emotionally for the possibility of being taken away, already trying to make her mother feel better about a situation that was entirely Sarah's fault. "Emma, look at me." Sarah sat down across from her daughter, taking her hands. "I need you to understand something. I am sick. I have an addiction, just like people who can't stop drinking or using drugs. That doesn't excuse what I've done to us, but it explains it, and I'm going to get help." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But what if it's too late? Then I'll prove to them that I can change, that I am changing." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hands. "I'm going to a meeting tonight. It's called Gamblers Anonymous, and it's for people like me who have lost control." The drive to St. Mark's Community Center felt like the longest 20 minutes of Sarah's life. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications from a gambling app she'd downloaded weeks ago. "Sarah, your lucky numbers are waiting," and she finally turned it off completely. The meeting room was in the church basement, fluorescent lit and smelling faintly of coffee and floor wax. About 15 people sat in a circle of folding chairs, ranging in age from college students to senior citizens. What struck Sarah most was how normal they all looked, not the desperate, hollow-eyed addicts she had somehow expected, but regular people who could have been her neighbors, her co-workers, her friends. "Hi, I'm David, and I'm a compulsive gambler." The man leading the meeting was probably in his 50s, wearing a simple button-down shirt and speaking with quiet authority. "Today marks 847 days since my last bet." As the sharing began, Sarah heard her own story reflected in different voices. The accountant who embezzled from his firm to cover gambling debts, the grandmother who lost her house playing slot machines, the college student who dropped out after betting her tuition money on sports. Each story was different in its details, but identical in its progression. The initial wins, the mounting losses, the lies, the isolation, the moment when the addiction consumed everything else. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Hi, I'm Sarah, and I think I'm a compulsive gambler. I might lose my daughter on Monday because of what I've done." The room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the ventilation system. Then David spoke. "Sarah, you took the hardest step by walking through that. But tonight, whatever happens on Monday, you're not facing it alone anymore." For the first time in months, Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Sarah sat in the hallway outside Family Courtroom 3B, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. Beside her, the public defender assigned to her case, a tired-looking woman named Rebecca Walsh, reviewed their file one last time. "Remember," Rebecca said quietly, "be honest, be contrite, but also be specific about the changes you've made. Judge Morrison has seen a lot of parents make promises they don't keep." In the 4 days since Sarah's first GA meeting, she had thrown herself into recovery with the same intensity she'd once brought to gambling. She attended meetings every day, met with a financial counselor, and started seeing a therapist who specialized in addiction. More importantly, she had been completely honest with Emma about everything: the extent of their debt, the reality of her addiction, and the genuine possibility that they might be separated. "Ms. Martinez?" A bailiff called her name, and suddenly it was time. Judge Morrison was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who reviewed Sarah's case file with the weary expression of someone who had seen too many broken families. Emma sat in the front row with Ms. Chen, looking small and scared in her best dress. The hearing began with testimony from the investigating social worker about the conditions they'd found, the shut-off utilities, the unpaid bills, the evidence of Emma essentially caring for herself while Sarah spent nights at the casino. Each fact was presented clinically without emotion, but Sarah felt each one like a physical blow. "Ms. Martinez," Judge Morrison said finally, "you understand that the state's primary concern is Emma's welfare, not your rehabilitation." "Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely." Sarah stood, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know I've failed my daughter in every way that matters. I put my addiction before her safety, her security, her emotional well-being. But I want you to know what I've done in the past week." Sarah presented her evidence methodically, signed documentation from Gamblers Anonymous, showing daily attendance, a payment plan worked out with the utility company, a letter from her employer confirming her return to work, and a comprehensive budget created with the help of a financial counselor. "I've also installed blocking software on all my devices to prevent access to gambling websites, closed all my credit card accounts, and arranged for my paycheck to be directly deposited into an account that Emma and I managed together," Sarah continued. I know this doesn't undo the damage I've caused, but I hope it shows my commitment to change." Judge Morrison looked at Emma. "Young lady, would you like to say anything?" Emma stood slowly, her voice quiet but clear. "Your Honor, my mom is sick, but she's getting better. I know she's hurt me, but I also know she loves me. I want to stay with her and help her get well if you'll let us try." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Morrison studied both of them for what felt like an eternity before speaking. "Ms. Martinez, I'm going to allow Emma to remain in your custody on a conditional basis. You will submit to monthly check-ins with Child Protective Services, continue your addiction treatment, and Emma will meet regularly with a counselor to assess her well-being. Any gambling activity, any missed appointments, any indication that Emma's welfare is compromised, and she will be removed immediately. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor. Thank you." As they left the courthouse together, Emma slipped her hand into Sarah's. It was the first time her daughter had initiated physical contact in weeks, and Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "We're going to be okay, aren't we, Mum?" "Yes, baby, we're going to be okay." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the kitchen of their new apartment, smaller than their old place, but bright and clean and entirely within their budget. Emma sat at the table working on college applications, her grades having recovered remarkably, once the chaos of their lives had settled into a new, stable rhythm. "Mum, can you look at my essay about overcoming adversity?" Emma asked, not looking up from her laptop. "I wrote about this year, about what we went through together." Sarah wiped her hands on a dish towel and sat beside her daughter. The essay was beautifully written, mature and thoughtful, in a way that showed how much Emma had grown during their darkest period. She wrote about fear and responsibility, about watching her mother struggle with addiction, and about learning that love sometimes means making difficult choices. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Sarah said, meaning it completely. "But are you sure you want to share something so personal?" Emma looked at her seriously. "Mom, what happened to us happens to a lot of families. Maybe if I write about it honestly, it could help someone else realize they're not alone." The wisdom in her daughter's words took Sarah's breath away. At 15, Emma had developed an emotional maturity that Sarah was still working to achieve herself. Sarah's phone chimed with a reminder, GA meeting, 7 p.m. She had attended 180 consecutive meetings, and while the initial desperation had faded, she knew the work of recovery was ongoing, daily and essential. "Want to come with me tonight?" Sarah asked. "There's a family meeting once a month for relatives, of gamblers. You've never been to one, but you might find it helpful." Emma considered this. "Will there be other kids there whose parents—" "Yes, kids who've been through what you've been through. Adults who understand what it's like to love someone with an addiction." They drove to St. Mark's Community Center together, the familiar route now associated with healing rather than desperation. In the meeting room, Sarah watched Emma cautiously join a small group of teenagers and young adults, all of them sharing the particular burden of having addicted parents. David, who had become something of a mentor to Sarah, smiled as she took her usual seat. "How are you feeling?" "Grateful," Sarah said, and meant it. "Scared sometimes, but grateful." "That's recovery," David nodded. "One day at a time, one choice at a time." As the meeting began, Sarah caught Emma's eye across the room. Her daughter smiled, not the forced, worried smile she'd worn for months during the worst of Sarah's gambling, but a genuine expression of peace and hope. Outside, after the meeting, Emma linked her arm through Sarah's as they walked to their car. "Mom, I'm proud of you. I know this is hard every day, but you keep doing it anyway." "I keep doing it for you," Sarah replied. "No," Emma said firmly. "You keep doing it for us. There's a difference." As they drove home through the quiet streets of Reno, Sarah realized her daughter was right. Recovery wasn't just about avoiding the casino or attending meetings or managing their budget. It was about rebuilding their relationship, their trust, their future together. It was about becoming the mother Emma deserved and the person Sarah wanted to be. The neon lights of the casinos still beckoned from Virginia Street, but they held no power over her anymore. She had something infinitely more valuable than any jackpot. She had her daughter's trust, her own self-respect, and the knowledge that every day she chose recovery, she was choosing love over destruction, hope over despair, family over addiction. And for the first time in over a year, that felt like the winning hand.